Aloha, everybody. A big mahalo to all the organizers, A-Firm, and all of you for sticking around to the very end here. I really appreciate it. I'm a graduate student. Also, I'm an organizer with our graduate student worker union. So if you happen to be a graduate student or working at the university, please get in touch with me. So why am I here? I'm in my last semester. I should be writing on my thesis right now. But I'm here because I see the fate of my liberation tied in with everyone else's here. I'm technically doing everything that's right, supposedly in society. I'm following the success sequence, right? I haven't married yet. I'm getting my master's degree. You know, I've been in the working world. I have a job, but I don't. It's becoming more and more uncertain whether or not I will actually make it. And even if I did, you know, I don't want to be a crab, you know, that's like pushing down all the other crabs in the pot, you know, just trying to get out. So I think when we rise, we all have to rise together, and we all have to be part of this together. You know, straight up, the rent is too damn high. Why am I using this word socialist? So I'm an organizer with the Democratic Socialists of America, which is the largest socialist organization in the country. Why am I using this word that, you know, I think the American government thought it had erased out of our lexicon 50 years ago, right? It's because, you know, I'm spending half my income on rent. It's because I'm being told that I don't have any decent job opportunities once I get out of school. You know, it's because we've been at war for about almost 20 years now, if not, you know, I mean, depends on what you count as war or police actions. It's because, you know, we're killing the coral reefs in our society, you know, in our world. You know, we're destroying one of the greatest wonders of our world. The Great Barrier Reef is effectively dead now. So that's why I'm a socialist, because it labels the enemy, and that enemy to me is capitalism. You know, I was reading just an article earlier today, and I feel like it probably applies to Hawaii too, but it was about a study that was done in London, and it was finding that millennials today are spending 3 times as much on housing as their grandparents were. In fact, like 50 years ago, when their grandparents were our age, they were spending more on alcohol and tobacco combined than they were on rent, which is just mind-blowing to me. And I feel like that might be a similar situation here in Honolulu. You know, and that's crazy, you know. And, you know, you get told like, oh, but you have smartphones. I mean, if I could spend $250 a month on rent, I would throw this phone into the ocean, like easy. You know, so what's the socialist perspective on housing? We believe housing is a human right. We believe if you believe in people over profits, right, then you might be a socialist. So we believe that everybody deserves a home. You know, we live in a country where for every homeless person, there's 6 vacant houses, you know. In my mind, it's not supply that is the problem here. It's just the allocation of our current supply. So we believe that housing is a human right. You know, and this is something that socialists have known for a long time. You know, I'm going to reference back to 1872. The famous socialist theorist Freidreich Engels wrote a book called The Housing Question, or it was like a short pamphlet. And you know, he made the note that without substantial non-market intervention, the price of land and housing just will increase within city centers. You know, it's just a fact of life. So without substantial government intervention, community intervention, something outside the market preventing this, you're not going to stop it if you're just going to let the free market decide how housing and land is allocated. So I can talk a little bit about, you know, this is an idea now. I mean, we've had this dominance of the free market for, you know, many decades in our country, if not centuries. And I do feel like the ideological tide is shifting here. If you'll read different studies, you know, millennials now favor by a small margin socialist ideas over capitalist ideas, and I think that's going to continue as, you know, I don't see our economic situation changing for the better anytime soon without mass organization. So I do think the ideological tide is shifting, and I'll point out once again. I'll go back to the UK. There's the socialist labor leader, Jeremy Corbyn, who's the leader of the current opposition party there, their left-wing party. You guys remember Grenfell Tower? Happened earlier this year. It was like this massive low-income public housing project that burned up and went up in flames. An incredible image that was all over the news earlier this summer. In the days afterwards, you know, hundreds of people died, you know, over 100 in this catastrophe. In the days that followed, Jeremy Corbyn, the socialist leader, declared that he thought that empty luxury apartments in the area should be purchased by the government, you know, requisitioned with or without permission of the owners, and used to house the residents of the people that survived that fire. It immediately received this uproar from the media and other opposition political leaders. This is, you're basically Stalin. This is the road to like North Korea. This is, this is against all the sensibilities of Western property rights. And he faced that down. It turns out a week later they did a poll and it found that a vast majority of people in London supported the idea. It's the sensible thing to do. This is, in my mind, what it means to value people over profits. It's the socialist idea of housing is essentially who is going to decide, who gets to live here, who gets to decide about our housing. Is it going to be us, the people that live in the community, or is it going to be, a handful of rich people, shareholders, developers, these private equity firms like Blackstone, because it's going to be decided one way or the other. I'm not like an advocate of like big, scary bureaucratic governments, but I mean, I'm also not an advocate of just a handful of rich people deciding, what's going to happen with our land and our housing. So that's the socialist view of housing. So I want to talk a little bit about what other DSA chapters across this country are doing. So in DC, I've had the pleasure of being in DC and working alongside DSA members there. And they're deeply involved in housing measures. Anti-eviction actions is one of the biggest ones. So they have a very fast, rapid response to any eviction that people believe is unwarranted or illegal or just subject for debate. They have talented lawyers on hand, and they're there to respond to provide advice about tenants' rights. In Chicago, they're canvassing right now for a citywide rent control policy. In Seattle, DSA members are working in concert with other housing coalition people, tenants' rights unions like Joshua mentioned, and other affordable housing proponents. And they've been very successful at pushing at both the city and the state level measures such as limits to move-in fees, laws banning discrimination in who you can accept, as far as applications for rentals, limits on security deposits, increased renters' rights. And now they're going for the big one, which is overturning the state preemption measure against rent control. So they're trying to get rent control in the state. And I think similarly here in Hawaii, we have a lot of similar avenues that can be pursued. And I think it is almost, it's in the interests of developers and the politicians and, the 1% to make it seem like it's a really complicated issue that's outside of, the understanding of normal people. It's like, oh, these housing things, it's such a complicated thing, which is why we should let the market decide. I think the broad measures that we should be putting in, are pretty clear. I think we do need rent control here in the state. I do think we need increased renters' rights, something that we hardly have here, and I do think we need a massive, ultimately, these things like renters' rights, rent control, these are Band-Aids to ultimately what I think the solution is massive public housing programs that are, reinvestment in housing as a commons. Of course, the situation in Hawaii is also different in that, we have to recognize that while socialism deals with the reclamation of the commons, that commons, exists on land that has been dispossessed and has been colonized. So we have to take that into account and make our struggles intersectional. But I do think the basics of what makes sense for a humane housing plan are there. And it's incumbent upon us, then, like Joshua and others have said, to build this movement. Anita, the reporter earlier, made this point about how something like rent control wasn't politically popular. I see her point in that there's nobody pushing for that here. There's no organizations pushing for it. There's not like a mass movement pushing for it. But I do think it's politically popular. Pretty much anybody that lives with rent control loves rent control, So it can be popular. Finally, so we have city and state possibilities that we should be moving towards. And finally, I just want to say that our struggles should be, act locally, think globally. Our struggles should be internationalist because I think that if we make Hawaii this economically and socially just chain of islands, it's going to come back to us if the rest of the world isn't with us. You know what I mean? Because we're not insulated from the chaos that's within the rest of the world. So, and we're not alone in this. We're not necessarily unique in our housing crises. People all across the world are dealing with this, so we have to keep that in mind. Thank you, guys.